ND feels a unique connection to him. The human youngster believes himself to be a member of the Na'vi people since he has lived among them his whole life. Neytiri and Jack are having a conversation one night when they both spot a light spacecraft in the sky. The spacecraft suddenly reach them and begin inflicting mayhem. The Omotakai environment is set ablaze, causing extensive damage and the death of several creatures. A squad of warriors armed with robotic weaponry emerges from the spacecraft and destroys what is left of the location. When Neytiri and Jake, who are observing from a distance, find out that it is an RDA spacecraft carrying people who are on their way to Pandora to colonize it and create another main operations station, they are astonished. The action then switches to one of the human research facilities where a Colonel-like Na'vi clone has been successfully made by scientists. The information and memories gathered before his death have been given to him. As a result, everything is known to the Colonel's clone except for who and how he was murdered. The scientists have created clones of other troops who were there during their last invasion on Pandora in addition to the Colonel. The Colonel and his troops are thus determined to eliminate the Omotakai and Jake in particular. In the meanwhile, Jake commands a Na'vi army toward the RDA train supply lines in an effort to stave off the invaders. He infiltrates it effectively and makes off with food and munitions. One of his sons, Loke, disobeys instructions during this procedure and suffers an injury. Jake reprimands him and demands that he follow rules going forward. On the other side, the Colonel runs into his superior, General Ardmore, who tells him about the Scouts, the Na'vi's flying allies. They are presently slowing down and assaulting their helicopters. When the Quarch learn of this, they devise a plan to enter the woodland where they had previously fought and collect some data on them. Along with his other friends, he soon makes it to the jungle. Sadly, Jake's kids are also having fun in the same woodland. Immediately after, the Colonel goes around their former battleground and finds his robotic suit, which still has his remains inside. Loke notices all that is happening and promptly uses the voice transmitter he has around his neck to get in touch with his father. After hearing this, Jake advises Loke to avoid them and silently depart the area. Then, in order to make sure their children are safe, he and Neytiri fly into the jungle. Sadly, the humans catch Loke and his brothers as they attempt to escape. When the Colonel examines their fingers more closely, he discovers that they are his bitter rivals' kids. Neytiri and Jake show up at that same moment and start attacking the troops. The most of their kids are successfully let free, but Spider is not. Unfortunately, the cruel people take the kid away. Later, when the Colonel asks Spider his name, he recognizes him as his son right away. Jake approaches his wife in Omotakai and advises that they leave the area and go to the east coast. He worries that Spider will tell the Colonel and his men where they are. Jake also warns Neytiri that unless he joins the tribe, humans will continue to attack them since it was him who first murdered Colonel Quaritch. Neytiri does not want to leave her lovely house, but she is aware that what her husband says is accurate. She agrees to move with him as a result. General Ardmore, on the other hand, treats Spider cruelly by putting him in a revolving machine. He makes many unsuccessful attempts to get the youngster to provide crucial information. Spider just won't budge since he is too devoted to his Na'vi parents. The Colonel stops the spinning machine right away because he unexpectedly cannot witness his kid in this condition. He then goes up to the General and promises to deal with Spider in his own manner. Later, in a different room, he runs into the youngster and tells him that he's not a nasty guy. He also reveals that he is there to return him to Earth. Because of this, Spider decides to give him the information he requests in the end. The next clip shows Jake and his family flying out in their Scouts from their original land. They ultimately land in Meet Kaina, where another Na'vi tribe resides, after many days of flight. Surprisingly, the local Navis are pale in color and like staying in the water. They begin making fun of Jake and his crew when they come across them. Tanoari, the tribe's leader, and his wife soon make their way there. He expresses skepticism and claims that Jake and his family are unprepared to live in the ocean. Jake assures them that they will quickly adjust to the environment, but he is desperately trying to rescue his family. Then he describes how some people are pursuing him. When Tanoari learns this, she at last consents to let them remain and offers them a place to stay. Additionally, he wants his kids to teach Jake's kids how to swim and utilize their unique aquatic critters. As requested, the youngsters of Tanoari take their new acquaintances to the seashore and begin teaching them the fundamentals. Meanwhile, Loke, who is always up to no good, attempts to make contact with a marine monster but slips and falls into the ocean. When they see him, Tanoari's kids begin to giggle. The girl, Kiri, may be seen lurking deep inside the water while this is all going on. She has surprisingly acclimated well to the environment and can even manage certain marine life. The next day, Aonang, Tanawari's son, and his pals approach Kiri while she is practicing underwater meditation and begin calling her a weirdo. As a result, Lok shows up and strikes Aonang. As the clan chief's son, Jake later demands that his son go and apologize to Aonang after learning about the event. Lok reluctantly accepts and apologizes. Even if Aonang pardons him in front of others, he is still bitter within. So, under the guise of swimming, he brings Lok to a predetermined spot in order to teach him a lesson. Lok had no idea that the region is home to hazardous marine creatures. Later, when Lok is fishing, a big animal swims briskly at him. Fearful and terrified, Lok searches for assistance but is unable to locate anybody. But just then, a huge beast by the name of Payakan steps in to save the day. With the aid of its large head, it quickly dispatches the predator. Here, we learn that Payakan is a tulkun, a tranquil and wise being. The meat hyena consider the thousands of tulkuns in the water to be their spiritual kin. The biggest and most powerful of them all is Payakan. Payakan rescues Lok in the meantime and brings him to the surface. The latter also assists the monster by removing several harpoons that were ostensibly inflicting pain on it. The two develop a lovely friendship as a result of this. Later, when Lok arrives on shore, Tanawari summons him. The strict boss wants Aonang to apologize after learning about his son's misdeeds. The unselfish Lok, however, denies involvement from Aonang and takes responsibility for his deeds. This helps Aonang realize that the new Navis are really not all that horrible. After some time has passed, Lok rejoins his brother and friends and shares the story of how Payakan saved his life. To his amazement, no one takes him seriously. Instead, they make it known that Payakan is a murderer, which is why the other tulkuns have abandoned it. Spider, on the other side, informs the colonel about certain aspects of Navi culture before taking him to Hallelujah Mountain to choose a scout. The colonel stumbles at first but quickly learns how to fly it and does so. He soon learns where Jake could be, too, and gathers his army and marches for the meat hyena reef. When he gets there, he approaches several water Navis and asks whether they know Jake. The bad humans murder one of the Navis and set their homes on fire when the Navis shall know. The Navis maintain their position in the face of this. With no other alternatives left, the colonel orders his squad to pursue Plan B. He wants to murder many tulkuns right now in the hopes that it would eventually bring Jake out. But killing them also has another benefit. The tulkuns possess a priceless liquid in their brains that may lengthen life. A liter of this liquid will cost millions of dollars here on Earth. A few hunters soon begin searching for the sea monsters. They hit them with many trackers, knocking them out. A woman named Tulkun is brutally murdered as her children lie beside her in disbelief in a tragic moment. The trackers are still there within the tulkuns after the humans ultimately depart. The meat hyena feel enraged upon learning that their comrades are being murdered and choose to confront the assailants. Jake calms them down by pointing out that they must first tell the tulkuns about the trackers. The only way they can stop another strike is by doing this. When Lok learns this, he immediately heads over to tell his closest buddy Payakan. He is joined by Aonang and a few other locals. They ultimately run across Payakan and are ready to remove the tracker from him. The colonel and his hunting party, however, arrive in their whale ship just then. Lok contacts with his father and tells him about them after witnessing them. He and his companions also succeed in removing the tracker from Payakan's corpse just in time. They then dive beneath the sea to conceal themselves as the colonel's team begins to seek for them. Jake contacts Tanawari in the meanwhile and alerts him of the disappearance of their children. The latter is alarmed, and he immediately issues an order for his troops to be ready for battle. As soon as everyone has their weapons, they all go toward the fight area, including Jake and Neytiri. Meet Hyena tribe at the bottom of the sea, where the lights tubes welcome him as their own. Jake realizes he is in paradise with their gods as the film comes to a close as he recalls his fondest memories of his older son. The colonel, on the other hand, gives the go-ahead for his men to assault the tulkuns and search for Jake's kids. They finally locate Kiri and Tuk after much searching, and they catch them in a net. Lok makes an effort to rip the net, but instead finds himself being pushed toward the whale ship by it. They are handcuffed to the ship's railing as soon as the colonel shows there. He then removes the collar transmitter off of Lok and begs Jake to give up so that his kids are protected. Without any other choices, Jake consents to his demands. At the same time, Payakan resolves to rescue his closest buddy Lok after seeing him shackled to the deck. He leaps onto the deck in a dangerous maneuver and begins to manipulate the enormous fins. This destroys the ship and kills a large number of troops. Jake and the meat hyena assault the colonel and his soldiers while the colonel is distracted by this. They want to protect their kids, but they also want to get even. In the meanwhile, Spider destroys the whale ship's controller, forcing it to crash against some rocks and fill with water. To release Loke, Took, and Kiri, Jake and his oldest son Netayam rapidly ascend the deck. They then give the kids the go-ahead to go back to safety, but Loke objects. Instead, he makes the choice to protect Spider, his adopted brother. He is joined by Netayam, and after some looking about, they come upon Spider. The colonel sees as they prepare to depart the ship and starts firing. Unfortunately, one of the bullets hits Netayam, who suffers serious injuries. He is promptly taken to their mother on the coast by Loke and Spider, but he dies from massive blood loss. Neytiri begins to sob and wail inconsolably as she witnesses the death of her son and before of her eyes. The wicked colonel uses his scout to grab Kiri and Took in the meanwhile. He subsequently gets in touch with Jake and lets Jake know that he is with both of his daughters. Jake manages to calm Neytiri down after learning this knowledge and convinces her to work with him to rescue their kids. The latter complies, and furious, she summons her scout, takes her bow, and shoots her arrows towards the ship. As soon as Jake gets close to the ship, he sets off an explosion that kills the colonel's soldiers. Neytiri also appears and begins firing arrows at the surviving people, quickly murdering them. Jake rescues his little daughter Took in the meanwhile, but the colonel also arrives at the same moment. Kiri is being held at knife point by him. Then, after threatening Jake, the latter grudgingly drops his weapons. In the meanwhile, a vindictive Neytiri kidnaps Spider and professes her intention to murder him. The colonel first says that he is unrelated to Spider, but once Neytiri makes a little incision in the boy's chest, he departs from Kiri. Neytiri and her family then get ready to depart, but the colonel warns that he will hunt down and murder Jake once again. Later, Jake comes to the conclusion that in order to live peacefully, the colonel must be killed. He thus goes back to the battleground. This time, the bitter adversaries engage in a traditional fist battle. The two go against one another stride for stride in this tough race. But in the end, Jake, our hero, triumphs. He succeeds in encircling the colonel's neck with his arms and rendering him unconscious. Jake lets him drown in the water because he believes he is already dead. Unfortunately, he also finds it difficult to breathe and begins to sink. However, Loke saves him at the same moment and returns him to the surface. Later on, Payakan drags the whole family to the beach. Spider, on the other hand, also rescues his biological father by pulling him out of the sea. Spider, however, refuses to leave the facility with the colonel and goes back to his biological family. In the last scene, Netayam's corpse is buried by Jake's family in the hole,